We're going to be beginning in James chapter 1. Thanks for being here tonight. A few years ago, there was a gospel preacher. He was a friend of mine at the time, and he went missing one weekend. And I remember where I was. I was sitting at my computer, and the reason I knew this is because I was taking a break and scrolling on Facebook, or maybe I was working and doing Facebook, I don't remember, but there was a special Facebook group that was created and shared to promote awareness of the situation. And as I prayed about it and continued following the story for the next several hours, some of the details that were coming out were making me a little suspicious. And I started thinking to myself, man, I hope he didn't get caught up in something scandalous. And as soon as those suspicions started entering my mind, I started rebuking myself for thinking the worst about my friend. But then factual details emerged a day later that a 13-year-old girl at the same congregation went missing at the same time. And it was discovered that she and this preacher had run away together and had in fact been involved in an inappropriate relationship for several months. Now, fortunately, he regained his senses and returned the girl to her parents, turned himself over to the police where he was charged, convicted, and he spent several years in prison. How does something crazy like this happen? Even more, how does it happen to a Christian who stands in a pulpit week after week preaching God's word? You know what the thing that stuck with me the most about this thing is that he said in a testimony that he gave to a reporter who was allowed to interview him in jail as he awaited a trial. And he gave the reporter the stipulation that if he said his testimony, he would allow to say what he needed to say, to confess and to apologize in public. And here's what really stuck with me that he said. He said, if you had asked me a year ago if I could have ever got caught up in something like this, I would have told you there was absolutely no way. And I actually believe that. I'm sure no one here in this auditorium actually believes that they could ever be caught up in something that scandalous. That you would be capable of committing a sin of that magnitude just less than a year from now. I mean, it's unthinkable to you, isn't it? And so I ask again, how does something like this happen? Well, the Bible does not leave us guessing. In James chapter 1, James tells us exactly how it is that a person finds himself in a situation such as this. James tells us how a person can go from point A, where he's in absolute denial that anything like this could ever happen to him, to point B, where he's sitting in a jail cell wondering how he could ever do something like that. James 1 in verse 13 says this, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren." That's how it happens. It happens when we become enticed by lust and when we allow it to carry us to dark places that we should not be. And so when that lust conceives, sin results, that causes death. And this is not a physical death that is being talked about here in James. This is the death of the soul. And the Bible refers to this as spiritual death. Whenever you find sin, no matter what the sin happens to be, this is the process that has occurred. It doesn't matter what the sin is. It doesn't matter how we rank that sin in the grand scheme of things, because every single sin follows this process laid out by James. And I don't want this to happen to me or anyone else here. And so what I'd like to do this evening is I'd like for us to study a text together in Proverbs chapter 7. If you would turn to Proverbs chapter 7 with me. Because it's in this chapter where we are given an example of a young man who gets himself wrapped up in sin. And what is so instructive about this chapter is that God reveals for us the steps and the decisions that this young man took that led him to be enticed and carried away, where his lust was then conceived. In other words, how did this sinner in Proverbs 7 die? What choices did he make that mankind still makes today that leads to the horrible scandals that scatter so many lives? What Proverbs 7 does for us is it relays to us a general progression of actions on the part of a young man that ultimately results in a similar end to the story I told you this evening. Spiritual death, death by sin. And while some of the details of the story of Proverbs 7 are particular to sexual sin, brethren, most of them are not. Most of the progressions that we see in this story can occur in any aspect of sinfulness on our part. And so I think it would be helpful for us, young and old, married and unmarried, male and female, to analyze the particulars of the decisions that this individual in Proverbs 7 made, break down the steps, break down the rationalizations. Begin with me in Proverbs 7 and in verse 6. For at the window of my house I looked out through my lattice, and I saw among the naive and discerned among the youths a young man lacking sense, passing through the street near her corner, and he takes the way to her house. In the twilight, in the evening, in the middle of the night, and in the darkness, and behold, a woman comes to meet him, dressed as a harlot and cunning of heart. She is boisterous and rebellious. Her feet do not remain at home. She is now in the streets, now in the squares, and lurks by every corner. So she seizes him and kisses him. And with a brazen face she says to him, I was due to offer peace offerings today. I paid my vows. Therefore I have come out to meet you, to seek your presence earnestly, and I have found you. I have spread my couch with coverings, with colored linens of Egypt. I have sprinkled my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us drink our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with caresses, for my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He has taken a bag of money with him. At the full moon he will come home. With her many persuasions she entices him. With her flattering lips she seduces him. Suddenly he follows her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as one in fetters to the discipline of a fool, until an arrow pierces through his liver. As a bird hastens to the snare, so he does not know that it will cost him his life. It's in this passage, brethren, that there are some phases that are indicative of an attitude that every single one of us can have towards sin. And while we may not have ever been guilty of this particular sin that is mentioned here in this chapter, we have all been guilty of the motivations. And brethren, here's the key. If we can interrupt the process before it reaches its culmination, if we can arm ourselves with wisdom to cut off the temptation before it conceives, we can avoid so many sins in this life. So let's look at step by step what happened. And I want to tell you what step one is. It's very easy to see in this chapter. Step one is this guy got too close. He got too close. Verse 8, passing through the street near her corner, and he takes the way to her house. While the text tells her that he takes the way to her house, it's not the idea of him looking on Google Maps in order to find the way to her house. It's the idea that he happens to be in her neighborhood, and he happens to be on the road that leads past her house. Now, of course, the specific temptation here is that there's a woman who's enticing him, but don't let that limit your perspective on sin. Because this could easily be a bar enticing someone with alcohol. It could be a drug house offering help to someone who's addicted to drugs. It could be a horse track offering fulfillment of a gambling addiction. Or it could merely be the home of some friends who are engaged in activities that we just shouldn't be involved in. It could be a theater playing a movie that we don't need to be watching. It could be a website that's just a few clicks away that we don't need to be visiting. It could be a whole host of things. Brethren, the very first mistake that this young man made in all these circumstances was that he got too close. And we cannot stress enough the importance of staying as far away from sinful things as we can. But the problem with humanity is we've always wanted a glance. We've always wanted a peek, a sample, a taste test. And technically speaking, during that stage, we're still safe, technically speaking. I heard about a test that was being offered to prospective bus drivers of an elementary school in a town of high elevation that would require the bus drivers to take the bus on some pretty precarious trips around a mountain where the school was located. And as each driver stepped in the bus and showed his skills, some of the bus drivers got as close to the edge as they could to show, I know exactly where the edge of the road is. I know exactly how close to go without going over the edge. All of them, except for one driver. One driver hugged the center line the entire way up and stood as far from that edge as possible. And the other drivers mocked him. And they rolled their eyes at him saying, what a coward. He'll never get the job. And yet he did. Because the supervisor said, if my kids were on this bus, I'd want the driver to stay as far away from that edge as possible. Isn't that what you parents would want too? How about our Father in heaven? Here's the point. Where is the virtue and where is the wisdom in getting as close to sin as we can? Remember a decade or so ago, I can't remember, it was a few years back, the man with his son at the baseball game who reached over the railing to try to get the foul ball. Remember that story? What happened to that father? He fell over the rails to his death. Now, I don't like heights. I can guarantee you if that were me, I would have stayed as far away from that edge as possible. I've got other faults. I'm just saying that's not one of them. I'm very unlikely to fall to my death for getting too close to an edge because I do try to stay as far away from them as I can. Now, whether that is a virtue or weakness, the point that I'm trying to make is that all of us as disciples of our Lord Jesus Christ need to realize that the entire process of sin in Proverbs 7 would not have happened if this young man had acted towards sin the way that some people act toward heights. Stay back, stay away from it, and it will not be a problem. Now, if I'm on the edge, am I safe? Well, technically speaking, yes. But you run a greater risk of falling when you're close than if you stay as far away as you can. As Paul said in Romans 13 and verse 14, put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh in regards to its lust. If we can make provisions for sin, we're going to be more likely to sin. This young man, that's what he did as he passes through the street near her corner. And he takes the way that goes to her house. And that was his first mistake. And it was a mistake that would cost him. Step number 2, he does it in the dark. Look in verse 9. In the twilight, in the evening, in the middle of the night, and in the darkness. So he goes there under the cover of darkness because it's there in the darkness where no one will know where he is or what he's doing or where he's going. We go out in the darkness because that's where we can do things that people won't know about. That's where we can do things that people won't see or find out about it because there's no light to reveal it. And so that's why we hide our temper. We hide our covetousness. We hide our lust. We hide our selfishness. We don't want anyone else to know about it because then they'll key in on it, and we're not going to be able to get away with it. In John chapter 3 and verse 19 and 20, Jesus said it in this way. In John chapter 3, verses 19 and 20, he said, "This is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and men love the darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come to the light, for fear that his deeds will be exposed." In other words, put them in the light. Put it in the light, what you're doing. Don't hide in the darkness. Now, what he's doing here is he's speaking metaphorically and means that we need to expose our weaknesses and our difficulties with honesty and with transparency. And yes, sometimes with accountability. Sometimes we need somebody to know about our difficulties so that we can get help when we're tempted to deceive ourselves. Because I'll tell you this, if this young man in Proverbs 7 had maybe brought someone with him, or if he had told his wife or a friend, "Hey, I'm going to this place and I'll arrive at this time and I'm going to be leaving at this time," he could have avoided being ensnared by this woman. But see, when he finds himself too close, and he does it at a time where there is no accountability whatsoever, no one to keep him in check, and no one to keep him honest, that's where his problems came. And so he gets too close. He does it in the darkness where there is no accountability, and it seems that he is just fixated on the forbidden. Verses 10 and 11 says, "And behold, a woman comes to him, dressed as a harlot and cunning of heart. She is boisterous and rebellious. Her feet do not remain at home." Boy, she sounds exciting, doesn't she? And you know, within every single one of us, there is this desire for the excitements of life. There's a desire for freedom. Nothing held back, total abandon, to which we can then become obsessed with those things that are off limits. It's interesting when God describes the children of Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai when they'd received the law of Moses, but Moses hadn't come down yet. Remember the situation with the golden calf? What it says that they were doing? They sat down to eat and they rose up to play. And the description of their play is sinful and sexual. It's abandonment. It's do what you like. Life without rules. And there is something within humanity that wants that. That has to find out how that forbidden fruit tastes. And so this woman, dressed as a harlot, boisterous, rebellious, she's interested in him, she's bringing out excitement in him. But if we think, brethren, that there are no rules and that we can just have fun and just go into total abandonment without ever having to pay the piper, we're living in a dream world. You know, Outback is one of my favorite restaurants, but no rules, just right. Do they even say that anymore? No rules, just right. We can't have it right without rules. How about we go in there and say, "No rules? Okay, I'll have a prime rib for a penny." "You can't do that. That's not right." "Well, why not? No rules, just right." You see, Outback abides by all the restaurant regulations that every other restaurant does. It abides by all the tax rules, but they want to lure us in with no rules here. Everybody's free. Outback commercials are a lot different from McDonald's commercials. Why? Freedom. But behind those scenes of freedom and abandon, or it's do what you want, when you want, with whoever that you want, behind all of that are broken lives and shattered dreams and spiritual poverty. A gospel preacher went to prison because he wanted freedom and he wanted excitement. But he left behind shattered and broken lives. Because that promise of freedom and that promise of excitement, brethren, is a big, fat lie. And Paul reminds us of this in Romans 6, that everybody serves somebody. In Romans chapter 6 and in verse 16, Romans 6 verse 16, the Apostle Paul says, "Do you not know that when you present yourselves to someone as slaves for obedience, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin resulting in death or of obedience resulting in righteousness?" That's a powerful verse with a powerful point. Everybody serves someone. Nobody has absolute freedom. Sometimes young adults will say, well, my parents told me to go to church, when I was younger, and now that I'm older, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. Well, you can say it and you can think it all you want, but you're not experiencing true freedom. What's really happening is the devil's playing you for a punk. He's tempting you to sin, and he's having a big fat laugh at your expense. Because there is no such thing as absolute freedom. There's always a bill to pay. There's always a price tag. This young man gets too close. He gets too comfortable in the darkness. He gets too fixated on the forbidden. But the fourth thing he does is he deceives himself. In verses 13 through 15, Proverbs 7, 13 through 15, it says, "So she seizes him and kisses him. And with a brazen face she says to him, I was due to offer peace offerings. Today I have paid my vows. Therefore I have come out to meet you, to seek your presence earnestly, and I have found you." The first thing she's saying here is, hey, look, I'm a faithful religious person too. This young man begins by just going down her street. Then he enters her presence, then he engages her in conversation, and he doesn't think there's anything wrong with it, and technically there's not anything wrong with that up to that point. And then we add this, now she's an overtly religious woman apparently. So this thing can't be sinful, right? But how many times have we been lured by those pretenses? Maybe it is some counsel or advice that someone gives us to help us with some kind of problem in our lives. And as a result, we ended up getting involved with that person in a way that we shouldn't have. Or maybe it's the mentality that says, it can't be wrong when it feels so right. After all, God just wants me to be happy. This, guys, finds its way into so many applications in life. Yeah, I know this isn't the best way to earn money, and I know that it's questionable what I'm doing, but man, this is for my retirement. I can take care of my family with this. I can give much more to the church with this. You know how many people buy lottery tickets and say if they win, they're going to give most of it to the church? You think that happens? Ill-gotten gains to help others. Or a parent telling their child something that isn't true in order to get them to obey a command that they think has a good purpose. The point is, brethren, we can so easily deceive ourselves when it comes to sin. But it's not just that this woman lures this young man in by claiming she's religious. She also lures him in by claiming, hey, I've sought you specifically. In other words, man, of all the young men that were coming here, you were the one that I was hoping was going to pass by my house. You were the one I've been seeking out. I've had my heart set on you for a long time. I really care about you. You mean so much to me. I know that Nigerian email scam is pretty old now. You still kind of get them, but everybody knows what's really going on there. But, those guys years ago that would, email you in the Nigerian email scam, they're always claiming to care for you, and all they were really trying to do was just get a hold of your bank account number. And that seems like a radical example to use, and I suspect nobody here ever fell for the Nigerian email scam, but some of us are old enough to remember Mary Winkler, the wife of that preacher up in Tennessee, and the broken and shattered lives that resulted from that tragedy. See, this young man isn't just lured by a person falsely claiming to be religious. He is lured by that idea that someone really cares for him when in fact they do not. In verse 15, therefore I have come out to meet you, to seek your presence earnestly, and I have found you. And this is going to be a perpetual challenge in our life, especially for those of us that struggle with self-doubt, to those of us that struggle with feelings of inadequacy, feelings of low self-worth. when someone comes along pretending to care about you. It'll happen in your dating life when sex is a temptation. It'll happen in your social interactions when you're invited to a party or a get-together that you shouldn't be at. How many times has this been a person's undoing? How many times have we been lured into a sin because we thought that somebody really cared about us when in fact they only cared about themselves? Happens all the time. He gets too close, he gets too comfortable in the darkness, he's too fixated on the forbidden, he deceives himself. And step 5, he's lured by his senses. I mean, it is clear that this young man longs for fleshly pleasure. Verses 16 through 18. She says, I've spread my couch with coverings, with colored linens of Egypt. I've sprinkled my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us drink our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with caresses. I mean, really pay attention to the sensory appeal that these things have. The eyes, the nose, the touch, the taste. About the only thing she doesn't mention is that she's downloaded his favorite music on his iPhone. I mean, we long for fleshly pleasure. We all do. We're attracted by those things that we see. Things that we smell, things we hear, things we touch, things we taste, and we're drawn by those things. But the Bible repeatedly stresses that those living for God must strive to live above that appeal when the temptation to indulge in it is outside of His laws. You know, every animal that has ever walked this earth has been drawn by those same appeals. But there has to be something different that is drawing us Christians. There has to be something that is drawing us Christians on a deeper level than simply the flesh. This woman is counting on this young man to take a shallow and carnal approach to the situation by telling him that these are all the things that will ultimately satisfy him. Verse 18, and then saying, come, let us drink our fill of love until morning. In other words, this is going to be great. We've got all night. Just let yourself go. And how many times have we been drawn by that? How many times have we been drawn to risk everything we have to gain some great amount of money, for example? So he gets too close, he gets comfortable in the darkness, he gets too fixated on the forbidden, he deceives himself that something good will come out of it, he longs to satisfy his senses, and sixth and finally, brethren, he doesn't believe he's going to get caught. Verse 19 and 20. For my husband is not at home. He's gone on a long journey. He has taken a bag of money with him. At the full moon, he will come home. You know, I can't think of any reason why we would commit a sin that we know we'd get caught for. I mean, don't we commit sin for the very reason that we don't think we'll get caught? And yet we're reminded in Numbers 32, verse 23, to be sure your sin will find you out. So I think one of the best ways for us to deal with sin in our lives is to always be thinking, what happens if I get caught? What are the consequences? How will this affect my life if it becomes public? But maybe even more than that, we need to dispense with the question of, will I be caught? And know that every single time we do sin, we are caught. Because God sees and knows everything we're doing when we're doing it. And so it's not a matter of whether we will be caught. We are caught every single time. And that is a good perspective to keep in mind. The life of a gospel preacher is absolutely ruined. And I have no doubt that if that man could have looked ahead in a crystal ball, he would have not done the things that he did. And so what's the solution? This is not on the slides, but look in Proverbs 5. Proverbs 5. Because in Proverbs 5, verse 7 and 8, here is the solution. Proverbs 5, verse 7 and 8. Proverbs 5, verses 7 and 8. Now then, my sons, listen to me, and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house. We've just got to keep ourselves as far enough away that things like this will never be a problem for us. I want to make just one point by way of practicality about this, and then the lesson will be yours. Brethren, it doesn't sound like a big deal to play what we call growing up penny ante poker. I don't know if that's used anymore. Penny ante poker. Doesn't sound like a big deal. But that's how gambling addiction starts. It doesn't sound like a big deal for a boyfriend or a girlfriend to be alone together in each other's apartments. But that's how you end up crossing moral lines. Don't allow yourself or your wife or your daughters to dress immodestly because you don't think anything will really come of that. Don't go there. Don't long for the praise of others, even when you don't really deserve all the credit, and then find out that other people are just going to start praising you, and then pride is going to become your downfall. Don't even let that start. Deflect it as soon as it begins. These are only a few examples, brethren, but the point is, don't even start down the path. Don't start even paving the road. And I bet if we sat here for another hour, we could come up with so many examples of how the sins we commit began as a result of this process up here. And so my encouragement to you tonight is just don't go there. Don't even start the path. Let's keep ourselves pure. Let's keep ourselves holy and listen to the lessons that the proverb writer is trying to tell us here in Proverbs chapter 7. Because if we can cut off the temptation before it begins to develop, we won't have to become just another cliche and another bad example like this young man in Proverbs, or another heartbreaking illustration from the pulpit. I want so much the best for everyone here. I know you want the best for me. We all want to help each other get to heaven. And it starts by reminding each other of how the path to sin begins. I hope this was an encouragement to you tonight. If there is someone here tonight, if you haven't started down the path towards becoming a Christian by obeying the gospel of Jesus Christ, well, then this path that we're talking about here tonight is really not going to be of much concern to you, other than maybe to help you avoid some physical issues in life until you have to stand before Jesus Christ and realize that the spiritual consequences are an infinite more times disaster than even the physical things that we experience here. And so we want to encourage you to put on Jesus Christ in baptism tonight if you are not a Christian. And if you don't understand what that is about, if you'd like further instruction or if you need encouragement along those lines, you can see me after services, or David will be glad to talk to you about that. But I want to say this too, that times of invitation are not just for people who are not Christians. It's for all of us. This is a large number of people here tonight, and somebody is trapped in something right now. I don't know who it is, but I know it's the case, and you do too. If you can't break the cycle, please get help. And that's what we're here to do. You don't have to come forward and let us know, but if you do, we will pray for you and try to encourage you in the best way that we know how. We'll study with you. We'll lift your hands. We'll help you to be accountable to the Lord. Can we help you tonight? Won't you come forward while we stand and while we sing?